Okay, so welcome to our session on the Bhagavad Gita. And today I will elaborate a little more on the introduction. So it's very important for us to understand that the Bhagavad Gita is not fiction. Many times people believe that the Bhagavad Gita is based upon mythology, and it's also often referred to as Krishna is often referred to as a mythological person. Well, I think before we begin the study of the Bhagavad Gita, it's better to dispel that notion, remove that misapprehension. Also, it's also many people describe the Bhagavad Gita as an allegory. And when I say allegory, they point out that Bhagavad Gita is really an allegory rather than a historical event. And it describes how the individual soul is being directed by the super soul or Paramatma. The Atma is being directed by the Paramatma on how to fight the thousands of sins that are sinful tendencies that confront him on the battlefield of life. This most famous description of the Bhagavad Gita, which accompanied the, shall we say, his translation of the Bhagavad Gita and interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, was by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Of course, Gandhi was the disciple of a Jain guru and essentially wedded to non-violence in its absolute sense. And therefore, he expressed or interpreted the Bhagavad Gita in that way. But we must understand that the Bhagavad Gita is not really an allegory. It is a conversation that took place between Krishna and Arjuna, between God and man, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, thousands of years ago. And the proof of the historical nature of the Bhagavad Gita is that the war actually did take place. And the war that actually did take place took place on Kurukshetra. And when it took place on Kurukshetra, you will understand that there is evidence of that. And the evidence of that is there in the Times of India itself. So in the chat, I'm sending you a link where you can actually look at the fact that researchers have found proof of the atomic war a great many years previous. So there was a Professor Gorbowsky, and this Professor Gorbowsky from Russia came to Kurukshetra, and finding Kurukshetra as the battlefield thousands of years ago, he unearthed a human skull. And having unearthed the human skull, he took it back to Russia and had it carbon dated. And when it was carbon dated, he found that it belonged to the skull of an individual who died in a nuclear war thousands of years before. And the evidence of the war that took place where atomic weapons were used is proof in that skull. Besides, the person Krishna is also not a myth. There is the example of Professor Rao, who is an archaeologist. And this archaeologist has conducted An archaeological find off the coast of Gujarat, where the submerged city of Dwarka exists underwater. And he has demonstrated and he has established that Krishna is not a myth either. So neither the Bhagavad Gita is a myth, or neither the Battle of Kurukshetra is a myth. The Mahabharata is not a myth. And the Bhagavad Gita is not a myth either, nor is the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita Krishna. So if you are very clear on that, then you should proceed. Otherwise, you may exit and look elsewhere for your spiritual learnings. Because Bhagavad Gita cannot be referred to as a myth. The Mahabharata cannot be referred to as a myth. This is the popular way Westerners who want to put down Indian religion and culture, they use words like myth and mythology in order to bring about a lowering of Indian religion and culture. So the words of the Bhagavad Gita spoken by Krishna are to be taken as the words of God. And what do you mean by the words of God? It means that Krishna is God. If you cannot accept Krishna as God, then once again Bhagavad Gita is useless for you. Because Bhagavad Gita means the song of God. There are many Gitas existing today. And these Gitas have all come post the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is the original Gita. All the rest are all imitations that have come about because Bhagavad Gita was so popular. And why was Bhagavad Gita so popular? The Bhagavad Gita was so popular because it caught the minds and the hearts of everybody on the subcontinent. Anyone who has studied the Bhagavad Gita anywhere in the world has become transformed as a result. And this transformation that occurs through the study and the application of the Bhagavad Gita in your life is evidence that this is the standard seminal text for all Indians. The Upanishads were spoken and meant for people who were renowned sages living in forests. But the Bhagavad Gita was spoken to a warrior on the battlefield, a warrior who was confused, a warrior who was overcome by false philosophies that had penetrated his mind and captured his understanding. So the Bhagavad Gita is a book that is the conversation between God and his devotee. And that devotee, while it is not an allegory, while it is a historical conversation, while it is from a historical event of the Mahabharata and the Battle of Kurukshetra, from Krishna, who is also a historical personality, who ruled over Dwarka and where evidence is found, is the conversation which we are going to study. Now, Krishna is not an individual who has attained divinity. Please understand this. Many people will try to confuse you and say that Krishna, oh, you are also like Krishna. You can also attain divinity and you can also become Krishna. This is false philosophy. Krishna is not only God in the Bhagavad Gita, but he is also the source of all other gods. He is the source of all other men, source of all other sages. He is in fact Sarva Karana Karanam. He is the cause of all causes. He is the divine. If the idea of divinity or the idea of theism confuses you or is something that you cannot stomach, then fine, you are welcome to follow religion without God, religion for atheists. You can also read my article on Speaking Tree, which is called The Spiritual Atheist. These are indeed all valid philosophies. And atheism is a valid path that will eventually lead you to divinity. But you must understand that the Bhagavad Gita, if you're going to study, you have to accept theism. And not only must you accept theism, you must accept that Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, is the Supreme Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna himself says that Dva imau purushau loke ksharas aksharas evacha sharas sarvani bhutani aksharas kutasto uchyate. Uttama purusha tva anya paramatmeti udarita yo lokatrayam avishya bibhartya avyaya ishvara. So he says there are two types of living beings, those who are mortal and those who have realized they are the soul and therefore they're immortal. And therefore they've become like an anvil of the blacksmith, which does not change no matter how much may be hammered on it. But Uttama Purusha, the supreme person, that is God, Tva Anya, he is supreme, he is separate from them, Anya. Paramatmeti Udaritah, and he is seated in your heart as Paramatma. So you must understand that this book is about Atma and Paramatma. It is a conversation between God and his devotee. This book, in fact, is not meant for people who are not going to be devotees of Krishna. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Idam nata paskaya na abhaktaya kadachan. This book is not meant for those who are not austere, those who are not inclined to be my devotees. It is not meant for people who do not want to listen. So all such people are excluded from this conversation or the wisdom that this conversation brings. And essentially the topics of the Bhagavad Gita I will cover with you will be, number one, Krishna, which is who is God. The second topic I will cover is the individual soul, which is who am I. The third topic I will cover with you is the topic of Prakriti. So, Purush means the Supreme Purush and the individual Purush. This is God and this individual soul. Prakriti is material nature. All that you see, hear, smell, taste, everything that you can understand and imagine within this world is formed of Prakriti. Divinity is transcendent to Prakriti. It lies beyond what you can see. It is Prakriti that is active, whereas both Bhagavan, that is the Lord, and the individual soul or the Jivatma, both of these are inactive. Of course, Prakriti acts because of the will of God, but God himself is consciousness supreme and he controls Prakriti, he controls the individual soul, but he engages in no special activity as such. Just like the individual soul always remains a sakshi, he always remains a witness to all that is happening. And all activity that takes place in the world takes place through Prakriti. The fourth topic is I'm going to cover, which is I think of interest to some of you who have asked questions, is the subject of karma. Bhut bhava udbhava karo visarga karma samgnitaha. Now each of us, while we are individual souls, also carry with us a part of Prakriti. And this part of Prakriti which expands our material body and our material life, is subject to the law which is called the law of karma. This I shall cover in the subject matter when bad things happen to good people, or why bad things happen to good people. Somebody once said, why don't you call it, why do good things happen to bad people? Okay, you can call it that also. And lastly, we will cover the subject of what is called yoga, and you will learn how to become a yogi. Yog means to reunite with God. It comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, which means to reunite. And a yogi is one who has attained and is trying to attain union with God. So there are many types of yoga described in the Bhagavad Gita, and that is a separate subject matter. So the subject matters are God, the individual soul, karma, which is the entanglement of the individual soul with Prakriti, and yoga, which is how to unite with God. To give you an example, in the Upanishad that is described, Mandukya Upanishad that is described, Pavakad Vispulinga. Pavakad Vispulinga means God is the fire, we are the sparks that emerge from that fire. And while we are the sparks that emerge from the fire, there is also a smoke that emerges from the fire. And that smoke which emerges from the fire is called Prakriti. The individual soul, when it mixes further and further and gets further and further lost in the smoke or Prakriti, is said to be engaged in karma. And that individual soul, which separates itself from the smoke of the fire and comes to re-enter into the fire, that spark is engaged in acts of yoga. So I will repeat that. God is the fire, we are the sparks. Material nature is the smoke that arises from the fire. The more we choose to get entangled in the smoke, we choose the path of karma. The alternate path is the path where the individual soul or the spark chooses to mingle with the fire, or the individual soul chooses to return to Godhead. And that is known as yoga. So these are the topics which the Bhagavad Gita consists of. 1, God; 2, individual soul; 3, Prakriti; 4, karma; and 5, different forms of yoga. So the Bhagavad Gita covers all these topics, and it is such a wonderful book that Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that when you have understood all that I am going to say to you, there will be nothing more to be known, either noumenal or phenomenal. That when you understand the Bhagavad Gita as Krishna speaks it, there will be nothing more for you to know, either material or spiritual. So the Bhagavad Gita contains all the wisdom of all the previous scriptures that have existed. It is said that the Upanishads are like the cows, and Krishna is the cowherd boy. And Krishna, as the cowherd boy, has milked the cows. And these cows he has, having milked, given us that milk in the Bhagavad Gita. So the Upanishads are the cows, the knowledge is the milk, Krishna is the cowherd boy, and he has presented this in the Bhagavad Gita. So I am not going to make this Bhagavad Gita series complicated. I want to make it simple because it was spoken in a simple way. Only over time, the effect of the fact that the language it was spoken in was not even classical Sanskrit which exists today, but is actually pre-classical Sanskrit. Therefore, the meanings are often obfuscated. It is very difficult to understand because, as I told you last time, the words that Krishna speaks have different meanings in different contexts. I gave you the example of karma. That karma could mean Vedic karma, it could mean your normal duties or actions which you perform within the world. Karma could also mean the moral consequence of your actions, or what we call as the law of karma, which we will discuss in why bad things happen to good people. So, if you simply try to understand the Bhagavad Gita by thinking that you will learn classical Sanskrit to understand the pre-classical Sanskrit, it's impossible. You will also find it difficult to read the Bhagavad Gita if you do not have the context of the Mahabharata. It's very important for you to understand that not only does Krishna speak the Bhagavad Gita, but that the Bhagavad Gita is well embedded within the Mahabharata. And there are ridiculous people who try to say that the Bhagavad Gita was a later on introduced into the Mahabharata. But that is not true, because actually, if you see, the Bhagavad Gita contains aspects in it which are integrally interconnected with different parts and verses and lines from the Mahabharata. It is directly and immediately connected with it. Others say that Bhagavad Gita has been expanded and it has been grown and it is the product of several authors. This is also nonsense, because statistical analysis of meter and verse has shown that the meter and verse of the Bhagavad Gita has remained consistent from the beginning to the end, proving that it belongs to a single author. So, the other conflict in understanding Bhagavad Gita is that the Bhagavad Gita was spoken so many thousand years ago, and it has been interpreted and misinterpreted, and it has been used to promote so many philosophies which have nothing to do with Bhagavad Gita. So, for example, different authorities have claimed that Bhagavad Gita speaks of this philosophy and that philosophy. But that's not true. The philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita is very, very, very clear, and it does not require somebody to interpret it, distort it, in order to present their philosophy through the mouth of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. So, I am going to give you the simplest translation, the simplest explanation of what Krishna says to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. And this simplicity will make you understand what Bhagavad Gita is about. The Bhagavad Gita is the primary text, it is a primer of Vaishnav Bhakti. It is the primer of Vaishnav Bhakti. Yes, of course, it contains Jnana. Yes, it contains instructions on Dhyan. Yes, it contains Sankhya. Yes, it contains Vedanta. And it contains many philosophies. But all these philosophies are integrated, synthesized, syncretized around the person Krishna, who is the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita. And Krishna is seen in the Bhagavad Gita as the incarnation of Vishnu. He is not an ordinary man. He reveals his cosmic universal form in the Bhagavad Gita. Something, if somebody claims to be God, please ask them to reveal their universal form, their cosmic form, and immediately you will realize that person is a fake. So individual souls can recognize their divinity and realize their divinity, but when it comes to God, God is God Himself and must not be confused with the individual soul. Even though there are many philosophies that try to confuse you on this issue. So the Bhagavad Gita describes in 18 chapters the wisdom that is there in all the ancient scriptures and gives you the essence of all wisdom. These 18 chapters are divided into the first 6, the next 6, and the last 6. So the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita essentially deal with the individual soul. It deals with the individual soul. It also explains the path of karma yoga, or how to perform one's one's duty in a performance of sacrifice and devotion such that you may attain union with God. The next 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita deal with God Himself. And while they deal with God Himself, just like the first 6 chapters deal with the individual soul, just like the first 6 chapters deal with the path of Karma Yoga, the heart of the Gita, that is the central 6 chapters, they actually deal with Bhakti Yoga, or the path of devotion to realize God. The last 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita deal with the subject matter of Prakriti. And as they deal with Prakriti, similarly, the path that is described in these last 6 chapters is the path of Jnana Yoga, or knowledge as a means to finding union with God. Many people say that Bhagavad Gita is about Vedanta, which of course it is, but parallelly and almost more dominant than Vedanta, you will find the philosophy of Sankhya, which finds favor within the Bhagavad Gita. And yet it includes both of them, so that Sankhya philosophy is actually subordinated to Vedanta philosophy. So there are many philosophies in the Bhagavad Gita, and I will be explaining them as I go along. But essentially what I am trying to give you is the Bhagavad Gita in the simplest possible form and in a manner by which you can apply it in your life. If you are embarking on a spiritual path, you require a 3-legged stool. And the first of the legs of the stool is an overarching philosophy of life. And this is where Bhagavad Gita fits the bill, because the Bhagavad Gita gives you an overarching philosophy of life. Like, who is God? Who am I? Why do bad things happen to good people? What should I do to attain union with God? If this world is a world of suffering, how do I find freedom from suffering? The Bhagavad Gita declares that this world is a dukhalayam ashashvatam. This is a place of misery where everything is temporary. He speaks of it as an anityam or sukham lokam. That this is a world where everything is temporary and you cannot find lasting happiness. He tells Arjun that janma, mrityu, jara, vyadhi, dukha, doshanu, darshanam. Birth, death, old age, disease, fault, misfortune, and happiness, they're all guaranteed to everyone. Look around you and you will see it. So long before the Buddha spoke, and the Buddha spoke the same things, because a lot of what the Buddha spoke was derived from the message of the Bhagavad Gita. So Buddha also said the essence of life is suffering, that birth is suffering, Death is suffering, old age is suffering. To be parted from someone you love is suffering. To be forced to bear the presence of someone you cannot bear, that is also suffering. So before the Buddha pointed out the way or the path to become free from suffering, Krishna also gave us the path to become free from suffering. Krishna not only taught us the paths of yoga, or how to become free from Prakriti and how to become free from suffering, which keeps on catching us birth after birth. But he also tells us how to become Sthita Prajna, how to become a sage of steady wisdom, who is free of reactive emotion, so that even when events occur in the world that are beyond our control, we are able to weather them with equanimity of mind. So emotional regulation and equanimity of mind is an essential gift which the Bhagavad Gita shall give you if you follow it sincerely and apply it in your life. So I think this is it time now for question answers?
Uh, we can take questions, Dr. Nagarkatti, if you
Yeah,
want right
let's take
now.
them. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Shantanu. One of the things that I personally, while listening to the session, I wanted to ask you, it is said that before picking up any spiritual practice, before picking up reading any spiritual text or anything you want to do, which will lead you, on the path of spirituality, your mind, should be clean. Your mind should be pure, and you should be in it for the good intention. So, while, before someone really starts taking small steps towards reading the Bhagavad Gita or, imbibing its values in life, what should really, one really start, where should be the starting point? Because, as you mentioned, Bhagavad Gita says that, there is no world without, death, depression. So, is it really true that our hearts should be completely pure before we really take up the Bhagavad Gita, or during the process, we tend to detoxify our hearts and our minds, and the process helps us spiritually?
So there is a very interesting verse which answers your question. And that verse says, Akamo sarva kamo va moksha kamo udaradi tivrena bhakti yogena yajita purusham param.
Mm.
It says whether you are full of desires, your mind is disturbed with so many desires, whether your mind is clean and you have no desires,
Mm.
or whether you only desire moksha, it doesn't matter.
Mm.
In all cases, turn to the Lord. So, of course, if you are a person who has been engaging in, shall we say, tapasya, who has been doing punya, who has engaged in religious and spiritual practices, no doubt you will find this path of the Bhagavad Gita very simple.
Mm.
But even if you are not thus cleansed when you begin the Bhagavad Gita, you will still find that the Bhagavad Gita will be the source of salvation and deliverance.
Mm.
In the ancient days,
Mm.
the Upanishads and the philosophy of the Upanishads pointed out that you should first of all be born into society as a Brahmin,
Mm.
as a man, and then you must denounce the world and take sannyas,
Mm.
and then you were qualified to attain divinity. But Krishna doesn't say that. He doesn't say that. He says the opposite. He says, Api ched sudracharo bhajate mam ananya bhak sadhu revasa mantavya samyak vyavasito hi saha shipram bhavati dharmatma shashvat shantim nigachyati kaunteya pratijanahi name bhaktya pranashyati. So Krishna says, even if you are behaved in your life as a sinner, even then, once you take to this path, you should be called a sadhu. And very quickly on attaining this path, you will become perfect. You will be known as a dharmatma. So Arjuna declared it boldly, my devotee shall never perish. Elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Api chedasi papebhyo sarvebhyo papakrittamah sarvam jnana plavaineva vrijinam santirishyasi. Even if you are the biggest sinner amongst all sinners, let's say there was a Nobel Prize for sinners and you qualified for it. Even then, Krishna says, with this knowledge that I am giving you, you shall become free, you shall become liberated. And seated on this boat of knowledge, you will cross over this ocean of suffering. Yatha idhamso samido agnir bhasmasat kurute Arjuna. Jnana agni dagdha karmani bhasmasat kurute tatha. Just like a blazing fire converts firewood into ashes, so also will you find that all your sins will be converted into ashes by this blazing fire of knowledge. So Krishna clearly says, Mam hi partha vyapashritya tepi syu papayonayah striyo vaishyas tatha shudras tepi yanti param gatim. He says, forget about the saintly brahmanas or forget about the kings or the royal Rajrishis. Forget about them. They will always find great benefit from this path. But even women, even Vaishyas, even Shudras, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what gender you belong to, which caste you belong to. Those who seek shelter of me shall be delivered in this life itself.
Right.
So the Bhagavad Gita democratizes the spiritual process. Earlier paths that existed were meant for the spiritual elite, the material elite. It was also called Raj Vidya Raj Guyam. It was meant for kings, and it was a secret meant for kings, and it was a king of secrets. But Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita gives a message which is meant for everybody and anybody.
Right.
And there's another verse in the Bhagavad which says, Kirata Huna Andhra Pulinda Kasadayah. It says that even if you are a tribesman who has absolutely had no exposure to religion, so even then he says, by taking shelter of God on this path which is known as the Bhagavat Marg, one can attain salvation. So no one is disqualified. Everybody is qualified. And everyone on taking up this path will find that they will become transformed. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, of course. So in a sense, it's a journey that you undertake.
Yes, spirituality is a journey that one undertakes. And that journey consists essentially of a three-legged stool, which consists of an overarching philosophy of life, which you find in the Bhagavad Gita. It consists of moral and ethical order, which you must follow, because otherwise you will be dislodged from the path of spirituality. And thirdly, you need a meditative process, or you need a process by which to tame the mind, wherein this combination of philosophy of life and which teaches you how to live life, the moral principles and code of ethics which will govern your behavior with the world so that you don't transgress those boundaries, and also the meditative process. Right. Unfortunately, most people focus on one or the other. But unless you have all three, it is unlikely that you will find what you're looking for.
Yeah, we'll thank you so much, Dr. Shantanu. We'll take the next question. Someone asked that does the wisdom of Gita span across lifetimes, cultures, and is not only limited to human life?
Let me answer this. Is a question which has different parts. One is, does it exist across lifetimes? Yes, it exists across lifetimes. While Krishna does clearly say that within this lifetime itself you may attain salvation by following him, he also points out, because Arjun says to Krishna, what will happen if, like a riven cloud, when I leave one cloud and a piece of one cloud leaves one and tries to join the other, and unable to find the other cloud, gives up in between, doesn't it perish? So Krishna tells him that don't worry. Na kalyana krit kaschid durgatim tata gacchati. That a person who's engaged on this path, he never meets with destruction. Even if a person takes to this path and does not complete it, he says that you will go directly, and we will discuss heaven, hell, liberation elsewhere. But he says you will go to heaven. And after innumerable years that you live in heaven and enjoy heavenly delights, you will be reborn on this earth in a family that is both pious and prosperous, where you shall pick up once again the path which you left incomplete. And if you are even more advanced, then you will be in a very rare case, you will be born into a family of yogis, where you will take up the path that you left off. This is what Krishna says. So it goes across lifetimes.
Right.
Then the question was, is it applicable to other people? There's a verse in the Puranas which says, Kita Pakshi Mriganam Cha Harau Sanyasya Matparaha. Even if you're an insect, even if you're an animal, even if you're a bird, by being devoted to God, you can attain salvation. There are many, many, many examples. You just have to Google and find out. There's a very famous example of a temple elephant who every day offered worship to God in the temple. And finally, at the time of death, that elephant came, offered obeisance to the temple, to the deity in the temple. And in this way, the elephant passed away.
Mm.
So, like this, there are many, many examples of animals also attaining salvation and liberation. There is, of course, the famous example of Gajendra Moksha, of the elephant Gajendra, who calling out to God attained salvation. So, in this way, there are so many examples in the scriptures, in history, in Google, you will find that even animals attain divinity by being absorbed in God.
Thank you, Dr. Shantanu. So the next question is, as you mentioned, the Gita is a conversation between human and God. How can we really make the best use of Krishna's advice in the real world while remaining intrinsically human with all our flaws?
So that's what this entire series is about. And this series, as I explained to you, is meant for everybody. With all your flaws, with all your sins, with all your sorrows, with all your handicaps, this path shall and will be your path to salvation. And we are going to discuss this in the lectures that go on from here.
Okay. Another question is, can we really completely, unequivocally understand the Bhagavad Gita, and is one lifetime enough for it? I mean, I think what she's trying to ask is that, does the learning ever stop? Do you really can claim to completely know the Gita, or is it like an ongoing process always?
Not at all. The whole purpose of this lecture series is so that you will know the Bhagavad Gita completely by the time you finish this Bhagavad
Which is
Gita.
a series.
Yes.
Okay. I think we can take another question. Um, Someone says, you mentioned the Gita has been misinterpreted too much. Of course, we are doing this series also, but apart from that, to understand the true essence of the Gita, do we need like a master or a learned man, or someone who knows the Gita in and out? But apart from that, do we need someone like that to help us, or if we really have to start ourselves, and if we have to start reading it ourselves, how do we do that?
I told you to read it yourself is fraught with difficulties and complications.
Mm-hmm.
So the purpose of this course is to simplify the Bhagavad Gita and help you to understand it in the quickest possible manner and apply it directly in your life as we go along. It's always useful to have someone teaching the Bhagavad Gita,
Mm-hmm.
just like it's always useful to have somebody teaching you something.
Mm-hmm.
If you were in school, you had a teacher. If you're in college, you had a teacher. So, like this, when you learn Bhagavad Gita, it's useful if you have a teacher. Unfortunately, the words of the teacher have been misinterpreted,
Right.
and all kinds of people have taken positions of gurudom where they have exploited their disciples financially, sexually, and otherwise. And therefore, people are very hesitant to accept a teacher. But I don't want you to accept a teacher in the sense of complete surrender. Complete surrender is meant for God. It's not about surrendering completely to a teacher. Complete surrender is meant for God. The teacher's job is to teach you how to surrender to God.
Right.
So your life should not become, shall I say, guru centered, but your life should become God centered. Because even if that guru is perfect, if you center your life around your guru because he has a mortal body and he passes away, what will you do? But if you center your life around God, which is what any true teacher should guide you and teach you, then God is always with you. He's always in your heart. If you want, there's a link I will give you, maybe if not this time, next time,
Sure.
on the dark side of Guru, which is also a Speaking Tree article.
Hmm.
It's called The Dark Side of Guru.
Okay. I can take it out, and I can post it in both the chat and the Facebook Live. I've actually posted the other articles also that you mentioned, one of them. So if it's a Speaking Tree article, I will just take it out. And so while people are going through the session, they can read the articles also
Yes.
simultaneously. I'll do that. Um, uh, I think we still have 10 minutes. Dr. Shantanu, maybe you'll cover this topic in the next sessions also. But generally also a lot of people write to us asking, what does the Gita say about forgiveness? We think of it as a very simple term, but it's one of the most difficult things to really do, is to forgive someone from the core of your heart. So what does the Gita really say about forgiveness?
Forgiveness must occur in the heart and it must occur in the mind.
Hmm.
Because without forgiveness, there is no hope for being human. Forget about aspiring for divinity. And we will be covering this in the course of the lectures. But you have to understand that the Bhagavad Gita is really about a war that is taking place, where the situation has gone far beyond forgiveness. In the sense, the Pandavas have been treated badly, cheated, they tried to murder them, they've tried so many things against them. And yet, Krishna advises them to be forgiving and even compromising.
Yeah.
And he says, don't ask for half the kingdom which you're entitled to or which they promised you. Say, give me one village for each of the Pandavas. And when he is told by Duryodhan that, yes, I will kill them all, I'll not give them even enough land that will sit on the head of a pin, then Krishna says, this matter has gone beyond the forgiveness of the Pandavas. Now it becomes necessary for them to protect themselves. When somebody is coming to kill you, there is no question of forgiveness. And this is what the Bhagavad Gita is about.
Right.
At the time the Bhagavad Gita was spoken, there was also an increasing, shall we say, groundswell of salvation-centric, non-violent philosophies, which were also atheistical. And the Bhagavad Gita is also a polemical work, which argues against this philosophy of non-violence, which argues against this philosophy of atheism, because it is a theistic text, and it's also not salvation-centric. You see, Indian philosophy has always talked about dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. And too many people are focusing entirely on moksha, forgetting about the first three.
Right.
But the Bhagavad Gita came to establish dharma and said that if you follow dharma in the way I have prescribed it, then even as you live a life of dharma, you will also simultaneously attain moksha. And your legitimate desires for pleasure and wealth will automatically be fulfilled in this life. So the focus here is really on dharma, on doing the right thing. And forgiveness cannot be really taken to an extreme extent. I'll give you an example. In Tibet, they had the most fierce warriors. And they had such fierce warriors that even Genghis Khan, when he spread across from Mongolia, right from China all the way to Europe, Genghis Khan was not able to conquer Tibet because Tibetan warriors were the most fierce.
Yes.
But when Tibet turned Buddhist, what happened? The Chinese soldiers just walked in and took over the nation. Now, India also has experienced the same thing quite recently. Chinese soldiers just stepped over the line. And if Indian soldiers had not responded and pushed them back and had talked about forgiveness and talked about non-violence, then we would be in a completely different situation.
True.
So Bhagavad Gita is not about violence, it is about surgical violence. It is about appropriate steps that are taken to protect yourself. Because without performing your swadharma, there is no chance of your attaining salvation. Because your swadharma is the path, doing your duty, your dharma is the path to salvation. Yataha pravrittir bhutanam yena sarvam idam tatam swakarmana abhyarchaya siddhim vindati manavaha. By performing your God-given duties in a spirit of sacrifice to the all-pervading Lord, each of us shall attain perfection. Is that clear?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Nagarkatti. I think we are almost out of time. We look forward to having you in the next session, which is next Thursday, February 25. And if you, you want to say something before we end the session, please go ahead.
So I would like to answer all questions as we go along. So all questions may be addressed to the host, Speaking Tree, to Ishita Sharma. And she will then send them to me. I will answer all questions, send it back to her, and she will then direct it to the individuals concerned.
Sure, sure. So we'll.
I want to finish all the questions from today's class before the next class. And so also each class, I would like to conclude answering all questions without letting them drag on and become irrelevant.
Right, right. So all your questions, both on through our Zoom platform and also through our Facebook Live, please post them in the comments section, and I will collate all of them and send it to Dr. Nagarkatti, and he will answer them before the next session begins. So every session we begin on a fresh slate. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Thank you so much, Dr. Nagarkatti. We will look forward to having everyone on board next Thursday, February 25 at 8 a.m. same time. Thank you so much and have a lovely day. Thank you, Dr. Nagarkatti.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.